Story 1. Blackwater County cannibal Sarah's headlamp cut through the darkness like a knife through black silk. Her breath formed clouds in the October air as she stumbled over fallen logs, chasing the fading beam of her partner, his flashlight ahead. Detective Mike Chen had vanished into the tree line 30 seconds ago. Now only silence filled the Appalachian forest. "Mike!" Her voice cracked against the wall of pine trees. No response, just the supernatural quiet that every American horror story warned you about. The kind that made your skin crawl and your heart hammer against your ribs. She should have listened to Sheriff Briggs back in town. He warned them about these woods, about the stories, about what happened to people who went looking for answers in Blackwater County after dark. But Sarah Martinez had 20 years of FBI experience behind her. She tracked serial killers through abandoned malls in Detroit. She walked into crack houses in Baltimore without flinching. A bunch of local ghost stories weren't going to stop her from closing the Henderson case. The Henderson family had vanished 3 weeks ago. Mom, Dad, and 2 kids. Their RV was found at the county line with all their belongings inside. Food still warm on the camp stove, like they just stepped out for a minute. Sarah pushed deeper into the woods. Her flashlight beam swept across ancient oaks and rotting stumps. Every shadow looked like a person. Every branch snap made her finger twitch toward her Glock. She'd grown up hearing creepypasta stories about places like this. Deep woods where time moved differently. Where things watched you from between the trees. Where people went in and different things came out wearing their faces. A twig snapped behind her. Sarah spun around, gun drawn. Nothing, just darkness pressing in from all sides like a living thing. Her radio crackled with static. "Chen, you copy? Static. Mike, where are you?" She followed what might have been a deer path down a steep embankment. Her boots slipped on wet leaves. The smell hit her first. Sweet and rotten, like meat left in the sun too long. Then she saw the cabin. It squatted in a clearing like a cancer. Logs black with age and moss. Windows dark as dead eyes. Smoke drifted from a crooked chimney. Someone was home. Sarah remembered the briefing. Back in 1982, hunters had found a hermit, his cabin in these same woods. The place was decorated with bones. Human bones. The investigation had connected the hermit to dozens of missing persons cases going back 30 years. But that was 40 years ago. The hermit was dead. The cabin had burned down. This couldn't be the same place. Could it? Sarah approached the structure with her weapon raised. The porch sagged under the weight of animal skulls hanging from the eaves. Deer, bear, raccoon, and others she couldn't identify. The bones were yellowed with age and polished smooth. She stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned like they were in pain. Through the grimy window, she could see shapes moving inside. Tall shapes, human shapes. The front door stood slightly open. Sarah pushed it with the barrel of her gun. It swung inward with a long, low creak that made every nerve in her body scream run. The smell inside was overpowering. Decay and wood smoke and something else. Something that reminded her of the morgue. The main room was lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. And those walls. God, those walls. Bones. Hundreds of them. Femurs and rib cages and skulls arranged in careful patterns. Some were yellowed with age. Others looked fresh, still had bits of tissue clinging to them. A pot bubbled over the fireplace. Steam rose from whatever was cooking inside. Sarah didn't want to know what it was. "FBI, anyone here?" Her voice echoed in the cramped space. A noise came from the back room, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Sarah moved deeper into the cabin. The floorboards were sticky under her boots. In the lamplight, she could see dark stains between the wood planks. Old blood, soaked deep into the grain. She passed a table covered with knives. Skinning knives, fillet knives, bone saws. All of them clean and sharp and ready for use. The dragging sound came again. Closer now. Sarah reached the doorway to the back room and peered inside. In the corner, something moved in the shadows. Something that might have been human once. It lifted its head and looked at her with milky white eyes. It was Mike Chen, or what was left of him. His legs were gone, cut off clean at the thigh. Fresh bandages wrapped around the stumps. He'd been cauterized to stop the bleeding. Kept alive, kept fresh. "Sarah," he whispered. His voice was thick with pain and drugs. "Run." That was when she heard the footsteps behind her. Sarah spun around. A man stood in the doorway, tall and thin like a scarecrow. His hair was long and gray, hanging in greasy strings around a face that belonged in a nightmare. Skin like leather, eyes the color of old bone. He wore clothes that might have been fashionable in 1982. "Welcome," he said. His voice was soft and polite, like he was greeting guests at a dinner party. "I was wondering when you find me." Sarah kept her gun trained on his chest. "Blackwater County Sheriff, this department." "You? Under arrest." The man smiled. His teeth were filed to points. "I think so, dear." He moved faster than anything human should be able to move. One second he was in the doorway. The next he was beside her, knocking the gun from her hand. It clattered across the floor and disappeared into the shadows. Sarah threw a punch at his throat. Her fist connected with something that felt more like tree bark than skin. He didn't even flinch. Now, he said, grabbing her wrist with fingers like iron bands. "That is not very polite." Up close, she could see that his skin wasn't just weathered. It was wrong, patched together from different sources. Different colors and textures stitched together with careful precision, like a quilt made of human hide. "Who are you?" she gasped. "Names have power," he said. "But the locals used to call me many things. The hermit, the cannibal, the thing in the woods that steals children in the night." He dragged her toward the main room. Sarah tried to dig her heels in, but he was impossibly strong. Supernatural strong. "You died in 1982, she said. "The police report said you burned in your cabin." "Death is just another country," he replied. "Some of us have learned to travel." He threw her into a chair by the fireplace. Heavy wooden restraints snapped shut around her wrists and ankles before she could move. The chair was stained dark with old blood. "You were not the first federal agent to find me," he said, stirring the pot over the fire. "Though most of them don't, they last as long as your friend back there." It's been quite entertaining. The smell from the pot made Sarah's stomach turn. She could see chunks of something floating in the broth. Meat and vegetables and things that might have been fingers. "The Henderson family," she said. "What did you do with them?" "Oh, they were delicious," he said, ladling some of the stew into a bowl. "The children especially. So tender, so full of life." Sarah pulled against the restraints. The wood was old but solid, built to hold struggling prey. "People will come looking for us," she said. "When we dawn, to check in, they send backup. The whole FBI will be crawling through these woods. Let them come," he said. "I've been feeding off lost souls for 40 years. A few more won't make much difference." He set the bowl on a small table beside her chair. Steam rose from the surface. Sarah could smell herbs and spices mixed with the underlying stench of human meat. "Now," he said, picking up a wooden spoon, "let's get some food in you. You need to put on weight if you are going to last through the winter." "I want to eat that." "Oh, but you will," he said. "They all do. Eventually. Hunger is a powerful motivator. And I have time, all the time in the world." Sarah looked around the cabin for some way to escape. The bones on the walls seemed to watch her with empty sockets. Some of the skulls were small. Children. As skulls, the Henderson kids. "Why?" she whispered. "Why not?" he said. "Man is the only animal that kills for pleasure. The only animal that wastes nothing. I am simply the most honest predator in these woods." He forced a spoonful of the stew between her lips. Sarah gagged and spit it out. The taste was worse than the smell. Sweet and salty and wrong on every level. "Stubborn," he said. "I like that. I'll keep your flavor longer." From the back room came a low moan. Mike was still alive, still suffering. "How long?" Sarah asked. "How long what? How long do you keep them alive?" The hermit smiled his pointed smile. "As long as it takes. Weeks sometimes. Months if they strong. The fear makes the meat taste better. Add spice." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. There had to be a way out. There was always a way out. Her FBI training had taught her that much. Stay calm. Look for opportunities. Wait for the right moment. But this wasn't a normal situation. This wasn't even a normal human being. The stories the locals told weren't just stories. They were warnings. American horror at its most primal and real. "Tell me about 1982, she said, trying to buy time. The good old days," he said, settling into a chair across from her. "I was young then, careless. I let the hunters find my first cabin. Let them see too much. They burned it down with me inside. But you didn't. You died. Death is a transition," he said. "Like birth. Some of us are just better at adapting to new environments." Sarah heard something outside, a rustling in the bushes. Hope flared in her chest. Backup. It had to be backup. The hermit heard it too. His head turned toward the door like a bird of prey sensing movement. "More visitors," he said. How wonderful. It's been so long since I had a proper feast. He stood up and moved toward the door. In the lamplight, Sarah could see that his shadow was wrong. Too long, too many limbs. The front door opened, footsteps on the porch, heavy boots. Hello, a man, his voice called out. FBI, we're looking for 2 missing agents. Sarah tried to scream, but the hermit was beside her in an instant, one leather hand clamped over her mouth. His skin smelled like grave dirt and old meat. Shush, he whispered in her ear. Let them come to us. 2 agents entered the cabin with weapons drawn. Sarah recognized them from the field office. Johnson and Torres, good agents, good people who were about to die because they followed her trail into hell. Jesus Christ, Johnson whispered, looking at the bone-covered walls. Martinez, Torres called out. Chen, where are you? The hermit let go of Sarah's mouth and stepped into the main room. He moved like smoke, appearing in front of the agents before they could react. Gentlemen, he said, you were just in time for dinner. Johnson fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets passed through the hermit like he was made of mist. He laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Torres ran for the door. The hermit moved faster, appearing in the doorway before the agent could reach it. One swipe of those iron-hard fingers opened Torres' throat. Blood sprayed across the cabin walls. Johnson was still firing, emptying his clip into something that couldn't be killed by conventional means. The hermit walked through the gunfire like it was rain, reaching out to grab the agent by the head. Sarah heard bones crack. Johnson collapsed, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. And then there was one, the hermit said, turning back to Sarah. Blood dripped from his fingers, fresh blood that would feed his hunger for a few more days. Sarah pulled against the restraints with every ounce of strength she had. The wood creaked but held firm. 40 years of use had made this chair perfect for its grim purpose. Don't worry, the hermit said, dragging the bodies toward the fireplace. You want to be alone. I'll keep your friends fresh for as long as possible. We'll all get to know each other very well. He began to butcher the corpses with practiced efficiency. Sarah turned her head away but couldn't block out the sounds. The wet tearing, the snap of breaking bones, the sizzle as fresh meat hit the hot pan. Hours passed. The hermit cooked and ate while Sarah sat trapped in her chair, forced to watch. He offered her bites of Johnson and Torres, laughing when she refused. The oil lamps burned lower, casting longer shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. Tell me about the other victims, Sarah said when the hermit finally sat back, satisfied. All those missing persons cases. Oh, so many stories, he said, cleaning blood from under his fingernails with a bone pick. Families on vacation, hikers who wandered off the trail, children who played too far from home. The locals know. Don, did they? They know what you are. Of course they know, he said. Their grandparents knew. Their great-grandparents knew. I've been part of Blackwater County longer than most of their families. I am practically a tourist attraction. Then why, Don, did they stop you? The hermit's smile was colder than winter wind. Because I only take outsiders. City folk who don't belong here. People like you who come poking around where they were not wanted. As long as I keep to that arrangement, the locals are happy to leave me alone. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. You saying they protecting you? Protecting themselves, he corrected. I am a natural part of the ecosystem here. A predator that keeps the tourist population under control. Better the devil, than the devil you don't. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Sheriff Briggs had warned them off the case for a reason. The whole town knew about the hermit. They'd been feeding him outsiders for decades. How many people know? She asked. Everyone who matters. The sheriff, the mayor, the old families. We have an understanding. They don't hunt me, and I don't hunt them. Sarah thought about all the missing persons reports, all the unsolved cases, families that had vanished without a trace in Blackwater County. The FBI had always assumed they were isolated incidents. Random bad luck, but they weren't random at all. They were offerings, sacrifices to keep a monster happy and fed. You sick, she whispered. I am honest, he replied. Every town in America has its secrets, its dark corners where unpleasant things happen. Most people just prefer not to look too closely. From the back room came another moan. Mike was still alive, still suffering, still being kept fresh for future meals. The hermit noticed her looking toward the sound. Would you like to say goodbye to your partner? He won. Didn't last much longer. The shock is setting in. Go to hell. They've been there, he said. It's not as bad as people make it out to be. At least everyone there is honest about what they want. He stood up and walked to the back room. Sarah heard Mike scream once, sharp and brief, then silence. When the hermit returned, he was wiping blood from his hands with a dirty rag. He was gone, he said matter-of-factly. But done? Don't worry. There was still plenty of meat left. Enough to last us both through the winter. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. There had to be something. Some weakness she could exploit. Some way to turn the tables. But what weapon did you use against something that couldn't? He died. How did you fight a monster that an entire town protected? Tell me about the supernatural side, she said. How did you survive the fire? The hermit sat down across from her again, settling in like he was preparing to tell a long story. It happened in the winter of 1982. He began. December, I think. The hunters found my cabin and called the police. They came with dogs and guns in righteous anger. He paused to stir the pot over the fire. Fresh meat was already cooking inside. I knew they were coming. You can hear cars from miles away in these woods. So I prepared. There are rituals, you see. Old ways of ensuring survival. Ways that predate Christianity and civilization and all the pretty lies people tell themselves. What kind of rituals? Blood magic. The kind your ancestors used before they got civilized and forgot how to survive. I fed the forest floor with the blood of my enemies. Made a pact with older powers. Darker powers. Sarah felt something shift in the air around them. The shadows on the walls seemed to deepen and move independently of the lamplight. The supernatural presence was growing stronger. When they burned my cabin, I let the flames take my flesh, the hermit continued. But I had already moved my essence elsewhere. Into the trees, into the soil, into the very bones of the earth. So you, what? A ghost, a spirit. I am something better, he said. I am a predator that can be killed by conventional means. A perfect fusion of human intelligence and primal hunger. The wind picked up outside, rattling the cabin, its windows. In the distance, Sarah could hear something howling. Not wolves, something else. Something that sounded almost human. My children, the hermit said, noticing her expression. The ones who didn't quite make it through the transformation. They hunt these woods now, looking for lost travelers, bringing me fresh meat. Sarah, its blood turned to ice water. There were more of them. A whole pack of monsters roaming the Appalachian wilderness. How many? She whispered. Enough, he said. We're a family now. A pack. We take care of each other. The howling grew closer. Sarah could make out multiple voices now, calling to each other through the darkness. Coordinating. Hunting. They caught our scent, the hermit said. They won't be here soon. We'll have quite the reunion. Sarah pulled against the restraints one more time. The wood was solid, but she noticed something. One of the metal brackets holding her left wrist had worked loose over the years. Just a fraction of an inch, but maybe enough. She began working her hand back and forth, trying to slip the restraint. The metal bit into her skin, drawing blood, but blood was lubricant. Blood might be her salvation. The hermit was facing away from her, watching the door, waiting for his pack to arrive. The howling was very close now. Just outside the cabin, Sarah, his hand slipped free. She immediately began working on the other restraints. The ankle bindings were tighter, but she could reach them now. Her fingers fumbled with the old mechanisms, trying to find the release points. The front door opened. A shape shambled inside. It might have been human once, but now it was something else. Its limbs were too long. Its face was wrong, distorted, like it had been put back together by someone who only had a vague memory of human anatomy. Welcome home, the hermit said to the creature. More shapes appeared in the doorway. Sarah counted at least 6 of them. All wrong, all twisted into something that belonged in nightmares. She got her left ankle free, then her right. Only the right wrist restraint remained. One of the creatures noticed her movement. It made a sound like grinding bones and pointed in her direction. The hermit turned around. Clever girl, he said. But where exactly do you think we're going to run to? Sarah finally freed her right hand and lunged for her gun. It had fallen near the fireplace. Her fingers closed around the grip just as the nearest creature reached for her. She put 3 rounds center mass into the thing, its chest. It staggered but didn't go down. Black ichor leaked from the bullet holes instead of blood. Conventional weapons won to work, the hermit said. They moved beyond such limitations. Sarah kept firing, backing toward the rear of the cabin. The creatures followed her, moving with inhuman grace. Their eyes reflected the lamplight like animal eyes. She reached the back room where Mike's body lay. The window was small, but it might be big enough. She shot out the glass and dove through the opening. Branches tore at her clothes as she landed in the bushes outside. She could hear the creatures scrambling through the window behind her. Their claws scraped against the wooden frame. Sarah ran. The forest was a maze of shadows and obstacles. Roots tried to trip her. Branches slapped at her face. Behind her, she could hear the pack giving chase. They moved through the woods like they were part of it. Born to it, she ran toward where they parked the car. If she could reach the vehicle, maybe she could get back to town. Get back up, get help. But even as she ran, she knew it was hopeless. The whole town was in on it. They'd been feeding the hermit for decades. There was nowhere to go for help. The car was right where they left it. Sarah fumbled for the keys in her pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip them. The engine turned over on the third try. She threw the car in reverse and floored it, spinning gravel as she backed out of the clearing. In the rearview mirror, she could see shapes emerging from the tree line. The hermit and his pack, watching her flee. They made no move to chase the car. They just stood there, patient as stones, because they knew something she was just beginning to understand. There was nowhere to run to. Sarah drove through the night, following dark country roads that seemed to twist back on themselves. Every turn looked familiar. Every mile marker seemed to repeat. She was driving in circles. By dawn, she was back at the cabin. The hermit was waiting for her on the porch, sitting in an old rocking chair like he never moved. His pack was nowhere to be seen, but Sarah knew they were close. Watching from the shadows, "Welcome back," he called out as she sat in the idling car. "I told you there was nowhere to go." Sarah looked at her fuel gauge. Empty. The radio was dead static. Her cell phone had no signal. "The roads only lead where I want them to lead," the hermit said. "This is my territory now. Has been for 40 years. Sarah got out of the car. She was out of options. Out of hope. "At least make it quick," she said. The hermit smiled his pointed smile. "Oh, my dear, we're just getting started." As Sarah walked toward the cabin, she noticed fresh bones hanging from the porch eaves. Some of them were small, child-sized. The Henderson kids, probably, turned into decorations for a monster. His home. She climbed the porch steps with leaden feet. Each board creaked under her weight like it was welcoming her back. The smell from inside was worse than before. Rotten decay and the sweet stench of cooking meat. "Your chair is still warm," the hermit said, following her inside. The restraints clicked shut around her wrists and ankles with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Sarah was back where she started, trapped in a nightmare that would never end. "Now then," the hermit said, stirring a fresh pot over the fire. "Where were we?" "Outside." Something howled in the distance. The sound echoed through the Appalachian mountains, carrying a message that every local would understand. Stay away from Blackwater County. Stay away from the woods. Stay away from the things that hunt in the darkness between the trees. Because some American horror stories never end. They just find new victims. And in the remote forests of Blackwater County, the hermit still waits. Still hunts. Still feeds on anyone foolish enough to go looking for answers in places where the truth is hungry and has teeth. The locals know. They've always known. And now you know too. Story 2. Siren of Lake Loraine. The boat engine died at 4:33 a.m. Maya Chen grabbed her flashlight as her 12-foot aluminum fishing boat drifted into the mist covering Lake Loraine. That's when she heard it. A woman, this voice singing from somewhere in the fog. Beautiful. Haunting. Wrong. The supernatural sound echoed across the water like nothing she experienced in 20 years of fishing Minnesota's remote lakes. This wasn't to human, but it wasn't animal either. Maya had come to Lake Loraine chasing stories. As a freelance journalist specializing in American horror legends and unexplained phenomena, she'd driven 4 hours north from Minneapolis after receiving a tip about missing fishermen. 3 boats found abandoned in the past month. Motors still running. No bodies recovered. Local authorities blamed equipment failure and drowning accidents. But Maya's source at the Itasca County Sheriff's Department had mentioned something else. Something the official reports left out. The survivors all told the same story before they stopped talking entirely. They heard singing. Maya pulled the starter cord on her outboard motor. Nothing. She tried again, flooding the engine in her haste. The singing grew closer. It wasn't coming from the shoreline. It was coming from beneath her boat. Lake Loraine stretched 12 miles long and dropped to depths that had never been properly measured. The Ojibwe tribes had called it Nibi Manitou, water spirit, and avoided it for generations before white settlers arrived in the 1800s. They built the town of Loraine Falls on the southern shore, harvesting timber and establishing fishing operations that thrived until 1952. That was the year the first boats started disappearing. Maya knew the history because she spent 3 days in the town library, reading newspaper archives and interviewing elderly residents. The pattern was always the same. Experienced fishermen would head out before dawn. Their boats would be found hours later, drifting empty, with no signs of struggle. The disappearances happened in clusters. 5 men in 1952, 3 in 1967, 4 in 1981, 7 in 1998. Always during late summer, when the lake, its thermal layers created perfect conditions for dense fog. And now, in 2024, it was happening again. The singing stopped abruptly. Maya's flashlight beam penetrated maybe 6 feet into the thick mist. She could barely see the bow of her own boat. The silence that followed the phantom voice felt heavier than the fog itself. She tried her cell phone. No signal. She expected that. Lake Loraine sat in a dead zone created by the surrounding hills and iron-rich geology. But she brought a satellite communicator for emergencies. The device showed no GPS signal either. That shouldn't be possible. Maya grabbed her emergency paddle and began working toward what she hoped was shore. The singing resumed, now coming from multiple directions. Harmonies that seemed to wrap around her boat like invisible tentacles. She researched siren legends extensively for a creepypasta anthology she published 2 years ago. Most cultures had some version of the story. Supernatural women who lured sailors to their deaths with irresistible songs. But those were ocean myths, saltwater legends. Lake Loraine was 300 miles from the nearest ocean. The voices multiplied. What had started as a single singer became a choir. Dozens of female voices creating melodies that made Maya's bones ache with longing. She found herself slowing her paddle strokes, listening. The songs told stories without words. Tales of love and loss, of depths that held secrets older than human memory. Maya could almost see the stories playing out in the mist. Shadowy figures dancing just beyond her vision. She shook her head violently, breaking the spell. This was how they got the others. The missing fishermen. They stopped fighting and listened until it was too late. Maya paddled harder, but the shoreline seemed to retreat with each stroke. The lake felt larger than it should, as if the boundaries had expanded while she wasn't paying attention. Her compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Something brushed against the hull of her boat. Maya aimed her flashlight at the water. The beam revealed nothing but dark waves lapping against the aluminum. But she could feel movement beneath her, something large passing under the boat like a living current. The singing grew louder, more insistent. Maya forced herself to keep paddling. She covered maybe 50 yards when her oar struck something solid. Not the bottom. The lake was over 100 feet deep in this area. Something else. She leaned over the side and saw pale flesh disappearing into the depths. Her scream echoed across the water, momentarily drowning out the supernatural chorus. Maya had interviewed the last survivor 2 days ago. Frank Morrison, 73 years old, had been fishing Lake Loraine for 40 years when his partner disappeared in July. Frank claimed he'd seen things in the water, things that looked human but moved wrong. They mermaids, he told her, his hands shaking as he lit his 4th cigarette in 10 minutes. Mermaids are supposed to be beautiful. These things, he shuddered, they used to be beautiful. Long time ago, but something happened to them. Something changed them. Frank had stopped fishing, sold his boat, wouldn't even drive past the lake anymore. The singing gets in your head, he whispered. Even now, I hear it sometimes. In my dreams, calling me back. Maya understood now why Frank had seemed so scared. The voices weren't just sound. They were presence, intelligence, will. They pushed against her consciousness like cold fingers probing for weakness. She could feel them testing her memories, searching for the right combination of loss and longing that would make her stop resisting. Her dead brother, his voice joined the chorus. David had drowned in a swimming pool when Maya was 16. She found his body floating face down while their parents were at work. The image had driven her to become a journalist. She needed to understand why terrible things happened, needed to find patterns and explanations that made sense of senseless tragedy. But now David, his voice was calling to her from the depths of Lake Loraine, singing the lullaby their mother used to hum. Promising reunion, promising peace. Maya bit her tongue hard enough to draw blood. The pain broke through the supernatural influence, reminding her that David was gone. had been gone for 20 years. Whatever was using his voice wasn't her brother. The thing pretending to be David surfaced 20 feet from her boat. It looked exactly like him at 17. Same curly black hair, same gap between his front teeth, same Star Wars t-shirt he'd been wearing the day he died. But his skin had the blue-white pallor of something that had spent decades underwater. His eyes were solid black, reflecting Maya, his flashlight beam like a nocturnal animal. Yes. Maya, it said in David's voice. I've been waiting so long. The water is not cold anymore. It's warm, safe. You don't have to be alone up there. More figures surfaced around her boat. Men in fishing gear that looked decades old. Women in clothes from different eras stretching back over a century. Children who might have fallen through ice in winters long past. All of them singing. All of them reaching toward her with waterlogged hands. Maya realized she stopped paddling. The oar hung limp in her grip as she stared at her brother's impossible face. Come down, David continued. Join us. We're all here, Maya. Everyone who ever loved the water more than the land. Everyone who chose to stay. Chose? Maya found her voice. The thing wearing David's face smiled. The song doesn't force anyone. It just shows them what they really want. Deep down, they always wanted to join me. That is why you came here. That is why you spent your whole life chasing stories about death and mystery. Maya looked around at the growing crowd of singers. They weren't attacking. They weren't trying to capsize her boat. They were just waiting, offering an invitation. The lake gives us everything we need, said a woman in a Victorian-era dress. Sustenance, purpose, community. We tend the depths. We guide new souls home. We preserve the stories that the surface world forgets. What are you? Maya asked. What happens when people choose the water over the air? Replied a man in overalls who might have been a farmer from the 1930s. When they decide that what lies beneath is more real than what floats above. Maya's research had touched on legends of underwater cities, Native American stories about spirit beings who lived in the deepest lakes, European folktales about drowned villages that continued to exist below the surface. But this felt different. These weren't monsters or spirits. They were people who had made a choice. The thermal layers, Maya said, understanding flooding through her. That's why it only happens during late summer fog. The temperature inversion creates acoustic conditions that carry your voices farther. David nodded approvingly. You always were the smart one. Yes, we can only call clearly when the water stratifies. But we're always here. Always singing. Always waiting. Waiting for what? For people who belong with us. Who understand that the surface world is just pretense. Noise. Distraction. Down here, everything is pure. Essential. Real. Maya thought about her life above the water. 20 years of chasing stories about the supernatural and unexplained. A career built on investigating death and mystery. No permanent relationships. No roots. No home except for the questions that drove her from one dark legend to another. Maybe David was right. Maybe she'd been looking for them all along. The singing intensified, and Maya felt herself leaning toward the water. Her brother, his hand was so close she could almost touch it. Then her phone buzzed. The notification sound cut through the supernatural chorus like a knife. Maya looked down at her phone screen. Somehow, impossibly, she had a signal. One bar, but enough for a text message to come through. It was from her editor in Minneapolis. Great work on the Lake Loraine piece. Sending photographer tomorrow for follow-up. This could be your breakthrough story. Maya stared at the message. Her breakthrough story, the thing she'd been working toward her entire career. She looked up at David's expectant face. She said. People need to know what is happening here. They need to understand. David's expression didn't change, but the other singers began to look disappointed. Frustrated. You can tell the story from here, said the Victorian woman. We have our own histories, our own legends, centuries of tales that no one above has ever heard, but they need to be warned, Maya insisted. Families need to know what happened to their loved ones. Do they? Asked David. Or would they rather believe their fathers and brothers and sons died accidentally? Quickly, would knowing the truth really help them? Maya considered this. She thought about Frank Morrison, traumatized by his experience, about the families of missing fishermen, wondering if their loved ones had suffered. The truth matters, she said finally. The singers exchanged glances. Their expressions grew cold. Then you were not ready, said David. But you will be. Everyone comes back to the water eventually. We'll keep singing, Maya. We'll keep waiting. The figures began sinking beneath the surface one by one. David was the last to disappear. "I love you, sister," he said in a voice that broke her heart because it sounded exactly like him. "When we ready to stop running from grief, we'll be here." He vanished into the dark water. The singing faded, but didn't stop completely. Maya could still hear it at the edge of her perception, a whisper that would probably follow her for the rest of her life. Her boat engine started on the first pull. Maya made it to shore as the sun rose over Lake Loraine. She filed her story that afternoon, but the editor killed it before publication. Too unbelievable. Not enough corroborating evidence. The photographer never came. Maya tried other outlets, but no one would run the piece. She posted it on her blog, but it disappeared after a few days. Technical glitch, the hosting company claimed. She began to understand that some stories weren't meant to be told. Frank Morrison died in his sleep 2 weeks later. Natural causes, according to the coroner. But Maya wondered if he finally answered the call he'd been hearing in his dreams. The disappearances at Lake Loraine stopped after Maya's visit. No more abandoned boats. No more missing fishermen. The supernatural activity seemed to have gone dormant, as if the singers were waiting for something specific. Maya left Minnesota and moved to New Mexico, as far from large bodies of water as she could get. She took a job writing travel articles and restaurant reviews. Safe topics, normal topics, but she kept having dreams about the lake. Dreams where David was still calling to her. Dreams where the Victorian woman showed her underwater libraries filled with stories no living person had ever read. Dreams where she swam down through thermal layers into depths that held more truth than the surface world could contain. Maya started taking sleeping pills, then stronger pills, anything to quiet the dreams. It didn't work. She could feel the call getting stronger, more insistent. Lake Loraine was 800 miles away, but the distance didn't matter. Water called to water, depth called to depth. Maya began researching other lakes, other disappearances. The pattern was everywhere once she knew what to look for. Every state had its own version of Lake Loraine, its own community of singers waiting in the depths. They were connected somehow, a network of underwater cities that spanned the continent, maybe the world. Maya realized the horrible truth. She hadn't escaped by refusing David's invitation. She simply delayed the inevitable. The supernatural forces that dwelt in America's deepest lakes were patient. They could wait decades for the right person to come along, someone who belonged with them. Someone whose life above water was just preparation for existence below. Maya tried to stay away from large bodies of water, but modern life made that impossible. Every river she crossed, every pond she passed, carried whispers of the deeper call. She started hearing David's voice in her shower, in rainstorms, in the sound of waves lapping against distant shores. The horror wasn't that the singers were trying to force her into the water. The horror was that they were right. Maya had spent her entire adult life chasing death and mystery because she was looking for her brother, looking for answers, looking for a way to join him that wouldn't be called suicide. Lake Loraine had shown her the way. 6 months after her encounter, Maya drove back to Minnesota. She told herself she was returning to gather more evidence, to find proof that editors couldn't ignore. But she knew the truth. She was going home. Maya arrived at Lake Loraine just before dawn on a foggy August morning. She rented the same boat from the same marina. The elderly owner looked at her with sad recognition. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked. "Lake, it's been quiet lately, but that doesn't mean it is safe." "I'm sure," Maya said. She paddled out to the center of the lake and waited. The singing started as the sun touched the horizon. This time, Maya didn't try to paddle away. She didn't bite her tongue or focus on the pain. She let the supernatural voices wash over her like a tide. David surfaced beside her boat. He looked exactly the same as before, but his expression was gentler, more welcoming. "Are you ready now?" he asked. Maya looked at the world above water. The sky was beginning to lighten, revealing the ordinary shoreline of an ordinary lake in an ordinary Minnesota morning. Soon, other boats would arrive carrying fishermen who would never hear the songs that called from the depths. They would cast their lines and catch their fish and go home to families who loved them. Normal lives, surface lives. Maya had never wanted a normal life. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "No," David promised. "It's like falling asleep. But instead of dreams, you get to live in the stories." Maya nodded and slipped over the side of the boat. The water was surprisingly warm. It surrounded her like an embrace, buoyant and welcoming. She could breathe it like air. David took her hand and guided her down through layers of temperature and light. Past the thermocline where the singing was clearest. Past depths where sunlight faded into a glow that came from the singers themselves. Maya saw the underwater city as they descended. Not ruins of something that had sunk, but structures built in and from the lake itself. Coral-like formations that housed the community of voices. Libraries carved from living stone. Gardens of aquatic plants that sang their own harmonies. It was beautiful. More beautiful than anything that existed on the surface. Maya's boat was found 3 hours later by the first fishing party of the day. Motor still running. No signs of struggle. The Coast Guard searched for 2 days before calling off the operation. Another accident. Another drowning in the deep, cold waters of Lake Loraine. But sometimes, on foggy August mornings, fishermen report hearing something impossible echoing across the water. A woman, his voice singing with the others, calling new souls home to the depths. Story 3. Harvest Scarecrows. The Scarecrow. His head turned to follow Elena's car as she drove past the cornfield at 11:47 p.m. She slammed on the brakes, heart hammering against her ribs. When she looked back, the figure stood motionless again, just old clothes stuffed with straw, arms spread wide on a wooden cross. But Elena knew what she'd seen. The supernatural encounter marked her third night in Greenfield, Iowa. And already she regretted taking the teaching job at the local elementary school. The town felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. Too quiet, too isolated, too full of secrets that the locals whispered about when they thought no one was listening. Elena had grown up in Chicago, where American horror stories were urban legends about vanishing hitchhikers and haunted L trains. Rural Iowa was supposed to be safe, boring, a place where the biggest excitement was high school football games and county fairs. She'd been wrong about that. Elena grabbed her phone and called her sister back in Illinois. Jess, I know it's late, but something weird is happening here. Elena, are you okay? You sound scared. I think the scarecrows in this town are moving. Silence stretched across the line. Then Jessica was nervous. You've been watching too many creepypasta videos. Scarecrows done. To move. It's just your imagination playing tricks in a new place. Elena wanted to believe that, but she'd seen the thing's head rotate with mechanical precision, tracking her movement like a security camera. No trick of shadows or tired eyes could explain that kind of deliberate motion. Maybe you rewrite, she said, not meaning it. After hanging up, Elena drove the remaining 2 miles to her rental house on the outskirts of town. The place was a small farmhouse that had belonged to the school district for decades, housing new teachers until they found permanent accommodations. Previous tenants had left things behind. Books about local history, old photographs of town festivals, a journal filled with observations about Greenfield, its unusual traditions. Elena had been reading that journal every night, trying to understand the community she joined. The entries painted a picture of a town obsessed with its harvest rituals. Every September, families were selected by something called the Council of Guardians to create protective scarecrows for their fields. The process was taken seriously, almost religiously. Specific materials had to be used. Specific prayers had to be spoken. Specific placements had to be observed. The journal's author, a teacher named Marcus Webb who worked in Greenfield during the 1990s, had grown increasingly disturbed by what he witnessed. His final entry was dated October 13, 1998. The scarecrows are not what they seem. I've been watching them through binoculars from my bedroom window. They move when no wind blows. They turn their heads to track movement across the fields. Last night, I saw one walking between the corn rows, its arms swinging at its sides like a person taking an evening stroll. I'm leaving tomorrow. This town is not safe. Marcus Webb had disappeared that same night. His car was found abandoned on Highway 34, 20 miles outside of Greenfield. No body was ever recovered. Elena had dismissed the journal as the paranoid ramblings of an unstable man. But after tonight, this encounter, she wasn't so sure. She parked in her driveway and hurried toward the house, keys already in her hand. The nearest scarecrow stood in the field across the road, maybe 50 yards away. Elena forced herself not to look at it directly, but she could feel its attention like a physical weight. Inside, she double-locked the front door and pulled all the curtains closed. Elena had moved to Greenfield 3 weeks ago, drawn by the promise of a fresh start in a close-knit community. The teaching position came with good benefits and the chance to make a real difference in children's its lives. She imagined herself becoming part of the town, its fabric, attending church socials and supporting local sports teams. Instead, she found herself increasingly isolated by the residents' strange behavior. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms. Children whispered about her in the school hallways. Parents gave her polite but distant smiles during conferences. Elena had initially attributed the cold reception to small-town suspicion of outsiders. But there was something more deliberate about it, more organized. She was being excluded from something important. Elena made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Marcus Webb's journal. She read it cover to cover 3 times, but tonight she was looking for details she might have missed. Webb had arrived in Greenfield in August 1997. Just like Elena, he'd been hired to teach 5th grade at the same school where she now worked. His early entries were enthusiastic, praising the town's commitment to education and traditional values. But by October, his tone had shifted dramatically. October 3rd, the Hernandez family has been chosen to create this year as guardian for the Northeast Field. Their 8-year-old daughter seems terrified by the honor. When I asked her about it, she said the guardian needs something special to make it strong. Something from the chosen family. I assumed she meant a personal item or family heirloom. Now I'm not so sure. October 7th, I drove past the Hernandez field tonight. Their scarecrow is different from the others. Taller, more lifelike. Its clothes fit too well to be random cast-offs. And there's something about the way it is positioned, like it is guarding the field against threats from the road, not birds from the sky. October 10th, Maria Hernandez hasn't been to school in 3 days. Her parents claim she is sick, but I saw her through their kitchen window yesterday. She looked healthy enough, just scared, like she was hiding from something or someone. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind rattling her windows. She noticed that several children had been absent from school recently. The principal, Mrs. Davidson, had mentioned that harvest season always brought family obligations that kept kids home. But Elena was beginning to suspect there was more to it. Elena's phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed a local number she didn't recognize. Hello, heavy breathing filled the line. Then a child's voice, barely above a whisper, dawned to look at them directly. They know when you were watching. The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, heart racing. The voice had sounded like one of her students, but she couldn't identify which one. She walked to the living room window and carefully parted the curtains. The scarecrow across the road hadn't moved, but something felt different about its posture. More alert, more focused. Elena grabbed her laptop and began researching Greenfield's history online. Most of what she found was standard small-town information. Founding date, population statistics, economic data. But buried in the University of Iowa folklore archive, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. A graduate student had written a thesis in 1973 about unusual agricultural practices in rural Iowa communities. Greenfield was mentioned specifically. The town of Greenfield maintains harvest traditions that appear to blend Christian symbolism with pre-Columbian indigenous practices. Local informants describe a yearly ritual in which guardians are created to protect crops from supernatural threats. These effigies reportedly require offerings from selected families to achieve their protective power. The nature of these offerings remains unclear, as townspeople are reluctant to discuss specifics with outsiders. The thesis included several interviews with former Greenfield residents who had left the community. Their stories painted a disturbing picture of a town controlled by ancient superstitions and dangerous traditions. One interview stood out. My family was chosen when I was 7 years old. They told us it was an honor, that we'd been selected to create a guardian that would protect everyone this harvest. But they needed something from us to make it work. Something precious, something loved. My parents gave them my little sister, his favorite doll at first, but the council said that wasn't enough. The guardian needed something with life in it, something with love. The interview ended abruptly there. Elena closed her laptop, feeling sick. She thought about her missing students, about the families chosen to create guardians, about the way parents had looked at her during conferences, not with suspicion, but with pity, like they knew something terrible was coming for her. Elena tried to convince herself she was overreacting. Small towns had their quirks. Rural communities often maintained traditions that seemed strange to outsiders. Just because she didn't understand Greenfield As harvest customs didn't. They were sinister. But the rational part of her mind was losing the battle against growing supernatural dread. Elena went to bed around midnight, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound outside made her freeze. The wind through the corn, branches scraping against the house, the distant lowing of cattle. And underneath it all, she heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the field across the road. Elena crept to her bedroom window and peered through the blinds. The scarecrow was no longer in its usual position. The wooden post stood empty, arms stretched wide but holding nothing but air. Movement in the corn rows caught her eye. A tall figure walking between the stalks with mechanical, measured steps. It wore the same clothes as the scarecrow, faded overalls and a plaid shirt stuffed with straw. But it moved with purpose, not the random swaying of something blown by wind. Elena grabbed her phone and tried to call 911, but the call wouldn't connect. No signal. In a town this small, cell coverage was spotty at best. The walking scarecrow emerged from the corn and began crossing the road toward her house. Elena ran to her front door and checked the locks. Deadbolt engaged, chain secured, but she knew instinctively that locks wouldn't stop whatever was approaching. The footsteps reached her porch. Elena held her breath, waiting for the knock that would come. Instead, she heard a different sound. Scratching. Something was writing on her front door. The scratching continued for several minutes, then stopped. Footsteps retreated across the porch and down the steps. Elena waited another hour before working up the courage to check what had been written. She turned on the porch light and opened the door carefully. Carved into the wood in crude letters was a single word. Chosen. Elena slammed the door shut and leaned against it, shaking. She'd been marked somehow. Selected for whatever ritual the town performed each harvest season. She thought about Marcus Webb, his disappearance. About the children who missed school. About families honored with the chance to create guardians. Elena understood now that the scarecrows weren't meant to protect crops from birds. They were meant to collect offerings from the chosen families. Elena packed her car before dawn, throwing clothes and essential items into suitcases without bothering to fold anything properly. She would drive back to Chicago and forget about the teaching job. Forfeit her contract if necessary. Some places were too dangerous to call home. As she loaded her trunk, Elena noticed that every scarecrow in the surrounding fields had turned to face her house. A dozen guardians standing sentinel in the morning mist, their burlap faces somehow conveying malevolent intelligence. Elena got in her car and started the engine. She had to get out of Greenfield before the town realized what she discovered. But as she reached the end of her driveway, her car died. Elena turned the key frantically, but nothing happened. The engine was completely dead. She popped the hood and saw immediately that someone had removed her spark plugs during the night. She was trapped. Elena grabbed her phone and tried calling her sister, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried 911 again. Same result. No signal. A knock on her passenger window made her jump. Mrs. Davidson, the school principal, stood beside her car. The elderly woman smiled pleasantly, as if Elena's panicked departure was perfectly normal. Having car trouble, dear? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Why, Don? Do you come inside? I called Jimmy Patterson to come take a look at your engine. He's very good with cars. That's okay. Elena managed. I'll just walk to town and find a mechanic. Mrs. Davidson, his smile never wavered. Oh, that one. To be necessary. The council has already made arrangements. Elena, his blood turned to ice. The council? The Council of Guardians. They've been expecting this conversation with you. Elena, you're a very observant young woman. We admire that quality. More figures approached from the surrounding fields. Men and women Elena recognized from town. The grocery store clerk, the bank manager, several of her students, parents. They moved with the same mechanical precision she observed in the walking scarecrow. What do you want from me? Elena asked. The same thing we wanted from Marcus Webb, Mrs. Davidson replied. The same thing we want from all the teachers who come here asking too many questions. Elena thought about the missing children, the families chosen to create guardians, the offerings that gave the scarecrows their protective power. You kill people to feed those things. Mrs. Davidson looked genuinely offended. Kill? Oh no, dear. We don't kill anyone. We simply give them purpose, a chance to serve something greater than themselves. The crowd around Elena's car had grown to include most of the town. Even the children were there, standing quietly behind their parents with blank expressions. The Guardians need life force to maintain their vigil, Mrs. Davidson continued. They protect our harvest from supernatural threats that you couldn't possibly understand. Skinwalkers from the western reservations. Shadow people that emerge from the old mining tunnels. Things that would destroy everything that built here. Elena realized the horrible truth. Greenfield, its residents genuinely believed they were protecting themselves and their community. The scarecrows weren't evil. They were a defense system powered by human sacrifice. But why teachers? Elena asked. Why people from outside? Because outsiders ask the right questions, said a man Elena recognized as the town librarian. They see patterns that locals miss. They make excellent guardians because their curiosity translates into vigilance. Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her car. These people weren't monsters. They were ordinary Americans who had convinced themselves that horror was necessary for survival. Marcus Webb became our Northwestern Guardian in 1998, Mrs. Davidson said proudly. He's been very effective at keeping the shadow people away from the Miller farm. Elena thought about the walking scarecrow she'd seen the night before. The mechanical movement, the unnatural awareness. Marcus Webb was still conscious inside that straw-stuffed shell, still aware of what had been done to him. Elena whispered. You don't have a choice, dear. The ritual requires willing participation. But we have ways of encouraging cooperation. Mrs. Davidson gestured toward the crowd. Elena saw several of her missing students being led forward by their parents. But something was wrong with the children. They moved with the same mechanical precision as the adults, but their eyes held a trapped, desperate awareness. We start with the children, Mrs. Davidson explained. Just a small portion of their life force to create minor guardians. Helpers that patrol the outer fields. They re-still themselves, mostly, but they understand the importance of our mission now. Elena watched in horror as one of her students, a bright 8-year-old named Tommy Peterson, turned his head toward her with robotic precision. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He was trying to warn her, but whatever had been done to him prevented speech. The adult transformation is more complete, Mrs. Davidson continued. Full consciousness transferred into a guardian body. You, LL, retain your awareness and intelligence, but you, LL, serve the community, its needs above your own desires. Elena understood now why the previous teacher's journal had ended so abruptly. Marcus Webb had discovered the truth just days before his transformation. I need time to think about this, Elena said desperately. Of course, we're not unreasonable. You have until sunset to make your decision. Willing participation makes the process much smoother for everyone involved. The crowd began to disperse, but Elena noticed that several people remained positioned around her house. Guards, making sure she didn't try to escape on foot. Elena went back inside and tried to think of options. Her car was disabled. Her phone had no signal. The town was miles from the nearest highway, surrounded by empty farmland. But maybe that isolation could work in her favor. Elena searched the house until she found what she was looking for, a CB radio that the previous tenant had left behind. She turned it on and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Mayday, Mayday, this is Elena Vasquez in Greenfield, Iowa. I need immediate assistance. The townspeople are holding me against my will. Static filled the response. Then a voice crackled through. Elena, this is Marcus Webb. Can you hear me? Elena's hands shook as she grabbed the microphone. Marcus, where are you? I am in the northwestern field. The tall scarecrow near the irrigation ditch. They turned me into a guardian 5 years ago. Oh God, are you still human? Partly. My consciousness is intact, but my body is straw and burlap now. I can only communicate through electronic devices when the atmospheric conditions are right. Elena looked out her window toward the field Marcus had mentioned. She could see a tall scarecrow standing motionless among the corn stalks. Can you help me escape? I've been trying to help for years, but the Guardians are bound to protect the town. I can act against Greenfield's interests directly, but there might be another way. Tell me. The ritual that creates Guardians requires consent. Forced transformation doesn't work. The consciousness fights back and the Guardian becomes unstable. That is why they give teachers time to accept their fate. So if I refuse, they'll keep trying to convince you, make your life miserable, threaten people you care about. But they can force the change. Elena felt a surge of hope. Then I just have to keep saying no. It's not that simple. They'll all wear you down eventually. And if you try to leave town and expose them, they have ways of stopping you. Other Guardians who aren't bound by the same restrictions I am. Elena thought about the walking scarecrow she encountered. The carved message on her door. What restrictions? I was a teacher. My core programming is to protect and educate. Even as a guardian, I can harm children or prevent the spread of knowledge. But some of the other guardians were created from different kinds of people. Farmers who would do anything to protect their land. Parents who would kill to defend their families. Elena understood. The town had an army of supernatural protectors, each one retaining the personality traits that had defined them in life. There has to be a way out of this. Marcus, his voice crackled with static. There is, but we're not going to like it. Tell me, burn the fields, destroy the guardians, physical forms. That will free their consciousness and leave the town defenseless against the real supernatural threats they were so afraid of. Elena stared at the endless rows of corn surrounding Greenfield. That would destroy the town's economy, ruin hundreds of families. Yes, but it would also free dozens of souls from eternal servitude. The question is whether you can live with the consequences of either choice. Elena set down the CB microphone and walked to her kitchen window. She could see Mrs. Davidson and several other townspeople setting up tables in the field across the road, preparing for some kind of ceremony. The sun was already past noon. She had maybe 6 hours before sunset. Elena tried the CB radio again, but Marcus didn't respond. The atmospheric conditions had changed, cutting off their communication. She was alone with an impossible decision. Elena spent the afternoon researching everything she could find about guardian rituals and supernatural protection systems. The more she learned, the more complicated the situation became. Greenfield wasn't just a town with unusual traditions. It sat on a convergence of ley lines that attracted malevolent entities from across the Midwest. Native American tribes had avoided the area for centuries, recognizing it as cursed ground. White settlers had built the town anyway, drawn by fertile soil and abundant water. But the supernatural attacks had started immediately. Crop failures, livestock deaths, children disappearing in the night. The Guardian system had been developed as a desperate defense against forces that conventional weapons couldn't touch. It worked, but at a terrible cost. Elena found testimonials from former residents who had escaped Greenfield decades ago. They described shadow creatures that moved like smoke and drained life from everything they touched. Shapeshifters that mimicked loved ones to gain access to homes. Swarms of insects that carried disease and madness. The Guardians kept these threats at bay, but only through constant vigilance powered by human consciousness. Elena realized that destroying the scarecrows wouldn't just free trapped souls. It would expose innocent families to supernatural horrors they couldn't understand or fight. But allowing the system to continue meant accepting her own transformation into one of those eternal sentinels. As the sun began to set, Elena made her choice. She walked outside and found Mrs. Davidson waiting on her porch. Have you decided, dear? I'll do it, Elena said. But I want to understand the process first. I want to know exactly what is going to happen to me. Mrs. Davidson smiled with genuine warmth. Of course, knowledge makes the transition easier for everyone. Elena followed the principal to the ceremonial site in the field across the road. The entire town had gathered, forming a circle around a wooden cross that had been erected near the road's edge. The transformation is surprisingly gentle, Mrs. Davidson explained as they walked. We will dress you in the Guardian's clothes and position you on the cross. Then the council will speak the binding words that transfer your consciousness into the straw body. What happens to my original body? It becomes a shell. I'll take it to the town cemetery and hold a proper funeral. Your family will be told that you died in a car accident. I'll never know what really happened. Elena nodded, trying to appear resigned to her fate. But she was actually studying the positions of the townspeople, looking for the best route to the cornfield where she had hidden her real plan. The process takes about an hour, Mrs. Davidson continued. You'll feel your awareness shifting gradually from flesh to straw. Some people find it frightening at first, but the sensation becomes quite peaceful once you accept it. They reached the wooden cross. Elena could see clothes laid out on a nearby table, the same faded overalls and plaid shirt she'd seen on the walking scarecrow. Before we begin, Elena said, I want to say goodbye to my old life properly. She pulled out her phone and pretended to take a selfie with the gathered townspeople. Instead, she activated the video recording function and live-streamed to her social media accounts. My name is Elena Vasquez, she said clearly. I am in Greenfield, Iowa, and these people are about to perform a human sacrifice ritual. If something happens to me, this is proof of what they were doing here. The townspeople realized what was happening and lunged toward her, but Elena was already running toward the cornfield. She'd hidden gasoline and matches there earlier, planning to create a distraction if needed. Now she was committed to Marcus Webb's nuclear option. Elena reached the irrigation ditch and began pouring gasoline on the dried corn stalks. The townspeople were close behind her, shouting and calling for her to stop. Do you understand what you redoing? Mrs. Davidson screamed. It'll doom us all. Elena lit the first match and dropped it onto the gasoline-soaked corn. The flames spread faster than she expected, racing through the dry stalks with explosive intensity. Within minutes, the entire northwestern field was ablaze. Elena heard an inhuman scream as the tall scarecrow, Marcus Webb, his guardian form, caught fire. The sound was part relief, part agony, as his consciousness was finally freed from its straw prison. But other sounds were rising from the burning field. Whispers in languages Elena didn't recognize. Movement in the smoke that didn't match the patterns of wind and flame. The Guardian's destruction was releasing something else. Elena ran toward the next field, spreading fire as she went. Behind her, the townspeople had stopped pursuing and were instead forming defensive circles around their homes. They knew what was coming. The shadow creatures emerged from the smoke like living nightmares. Tall, humanoid figures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved through the burning corn with predatory grace, hunting for the life force they'd been denied for decades. Elena watched in horror as the supernatural entities descended on Greenfield. She wanted to free the trapped souls. But she also unleashed the very threats the Guardians had been created to stop. The townspeople fought back with weapons Elena hadn't known they possessed. Silver bullets and blessed salt, iron crosses and burning sage. They'd been preparing for this possibility for generations. But without their guardian protectors, they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. Elena tried to help, but she didn't know how to fight creatures that existed halfway between dimensions. She could only watch as her former neighbors battled for their lives against horrors that defied rational explanation. The battle lasted until dawn, when the sun finally rose over the smoldering remains of Greenfield, its cornfields. Nearly half the town's population was gone. The survivors gathered in the town square, looking at Elena with expressions of grief and exhaustion rather than anger. "We tried to warn you," Mrs. Davidson said quietly. She looked decades older than she had the day before. "The Guardians weren't our enemies. They were our protectors." Elena knelt beside a child who had been touched by one of the shadow creatures. The boy was still alive, but his life force had been partially drained. He would recover, but he would never be completely whole again. I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "I thought I was saving people." "You were," said a familiar voice. Elena turned to see Marcus Webb approaching from the ruins of the northwestern field. He looked exactly as he had in the old photographs. Human again, freed from his straw prison. But his expression was haunted by the knowledge of what Elena's choice had cost. "The souls trapped in the Guardians are free now," Marcus continued. "We rehuman again. But the price," he gestured toward the devastated town. Elena realized the horrible irony of her situation. She made the same choice that had led to the Guardian system in the first place, choosing to fight supernatural threats despite the cost to innocent people. "What happens now?" she asked. Mrs. Davidson answered. "Now we rebuild. Create new protections. Find new ways to defend ourselves. Will you try to turn me into a Guardian?" "No. You've seen the price of our survival. You understand why we do what we do. That makes you more valuable as an ally than a prisoner." Elena looked around at the survivors. Children orphaned by shadow creatures. Adults traumatized by encounters with beings that shouldn't exist. Families torn apart by her choice to destroy their protectors. "I can stay here," she said. "We know, but we hope you'll remember us. Remember that sometimes the only choice is between different kinds of horror." Elena left Greenfield that morning, driving past burned fields and empty scarecrow posts. Her live stream had been dismissed as an elaborate hoax by most viewers, but she knew some people would believe. Word would spread. Other towns with similar supernatural problems would hear about Greenfield as tragedy. They would weigh their options and make their own terrible choices. Elena returned to Chicago, but she couldn't forget what she learned. She began researching other communities with unusual traditions. Other places where people made dark bargains to protect their families from threats the outside world couldn't understand. American horror wasn't just in creepypasta stories and urban legends. It was in the choices ordinary people made when faced with extraordinary evil. Elena never taught again, but she became something else, a chronicler of supernatural America. A witness to the hidden battles fought in small towns and rural communities across the country. She wrote about places like Greenfield, trying to help people understand that monsters weren't always the real enemy. Sometimes the monsters were just people who had run out of better options. But late at night, when the wind blew across the empty fields surrounding Chicago, Elena sometimes heard whispers in the darkness. Creatures that had followed her from Greenfield. Shadow beings that remembered her scent and wanted to finish what they started. Elena had destroyed the Guardians, but the supernatural threats remained. And now they knew where to find her. Story 4. Goatman. This bridge, the car died exactly 12 feet from the bridge. Sarah, as hands gripped the steering wheel as her Honda Civic rolled to a stop on the cracked asphalt. The headlights flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. The engine didn't sputter or wheeze. It just stopped, like someone had reached inside and torn out its heart. She sat in the darkness, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through the trees. This was supposed to be simple. Drive to the old bridge, take some photos for her American horror podcast, get back to Baltimore before midnight. Easy content about Maryland, this most notorious supernatural legend. The silence pressed against her eardrums. Sarah fumbled for her phone, its screen casting a pale blue glow across her face. No signal, of course. She was 15 miles from the nearest cell tower, deep in the woods where the old Goatman's bridge stretched across Kettle Creek like a broken finger pointing into the void. She grabbed her camera bag and stepped out of the car. The October air bit through her jacket, carrying the smell of dead leaves and something else. Something thick and animal, the kind of smell that made your throat close up. The bridge loomed ahead, its rusted iron frame barely visible in the starlight. Built in 1928, abandoned in 1987 when they rerouted the highway. Now it belonged to the trees and the stories people told in whispers. Stories about Oscar Washburn. Stories about what he became. Sarah had done her research. Oscar was a goat farmer who lived near the bridge in the 1940s. A black man trying to make an honest living in a time and place that didn't want him to succeed. When his business started thriving, when white customers began seeking out his premium goats, the local clan decided he'd forgotten his place. They came for him on a moonless night in August 1949, dragged him from his home, strung a noose around his neck, threw the rope over the bridge, his center beam, and let gravity do the rest. But when they looked down into the water, expecting to see his broken body, they found nothing. No corpse, no blood, just dark water reflecting their torches and their guilty faces. That is when the killing started. One by one, the men who lynched Oscar Washburn began disappearing. Their bodies were found days later, torn apart by claws that were too big to be human but too deliberate to be animal. Deep gouges in their chests, their throats opened like second mouths. And always, the hoof prints pressed deep into the earth around the corpses. The locals whispered that Oscar had made a deal in those final moments before death. Traded his humanity for vengeance, became something that could hunt in the darkness, something that remembered every face that watched him die. The Goatman of Maryland was born. Sarah stepped onto the bridge, her sneakers echoing off the metal grating. The structure groaned under her weight, protesting after decades of neglect. Rust flakes drifted down like orange snow. She raised her camera and started shooting. The flash lit up twisted metal and broken railings. Each burst of light revealed new details. Graffiti carved into the beams. Goatman lives, scraped in shaky letters. Below that, fresher markings that looked less like words and more like claw marks. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs as she lowered the camera. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no owls. Even the wind had stopped moving through the trees. She spun around, scanning the darkness beyond her small circle of vision. Something was watching her. She could feel it like pressure against her skull, heavy, impatient, and hungry. A stick snapped in the woods to her left. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She forced herself to stay calm, to think like the podcast host she was instead of the terrified woman she was becoming. This was perfect material. The isolation, the creeping dread, the way every shadow seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it. She turned on her phone, voice recorder, and lifted it to her mouth. This is Sarah Chen reporting from the infamous Goatman bridge in rural Maryland. It's 11:47 p.m. on October 15th, and I have to say, this place lives up to its scary reputation. The atmosphere here is thick with supernatural dread, the kind that makes American horror legends feel completely real. Another stick snapped, closer this time. The local creepypasta about this location tells of Oscar Washburn, a goat farmer who was murdered by the KKK in 1949. According to witnesses over the decades, his spirit still haunts this bridge, transformed into a creature that is half man, half goat. A monster driven by rage, and the sound cut through her words like a knife through silk. Click, 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 hooves on metal. Sarah's mouth went dry. She lowered the phone and strained to hear over her own racing pulse. The clicking was rhythmic, deliberate. Something heavy moving across the bridge. This metal grating with a measured gait that spoke of intelligence rather than animal instinct. Click, click, click. It was coming from behind her. Sarah turned slowly, her camera hanging forgotten around her neck. The bridge stretched back toward her car, but the darkness seemed deeper now, more solid. The kind of darkness that had weight and presence. Click, click, click. The footsteps were 30 feet away. 20 feet. 10. Sarah fumbled with her phone. This flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness and revealed nothing but empty bridge. Rusted metal and scattered leaves. No sign of whatever had been making those sounds. But the smell hit her like a physical blow. Musk and wet fur and something else. Something rotten. The stench of meat left too long in the sun. She gagged and stumbled backward, her heel catching on a loose piece of grating. For a heart-stopping moment, she teetered on the edge of the bridge, staring down into the black water 15 feet below. It's when she saw the reflection, not her own face staring back from the dark surface. Something else. Something with yellow eyes and curved horns and a mouth full of teeth that belonged on no earthly creature. The Goatman smiled up at her from the water. Sarah screamed and jerked away from the edge. She spun toward her car, but the path back was blocked. A figure stood in the middle of the bridge, silhouetted against the faint glow of starlight. It was tall, maybe 7 feet. Its legs bent backward at the knees like a goat, its ending in hooves that gleamed like black steel. Its torso was human in shape but covered in coarse, dark fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And its head was Oscar Washburn, his face mounted on a goat, his skull. Human eyes burned with supernatural hatred in sockets that were too deep, too hollow. The mouth hung open, revealing rows of sharp teeth behind lips that had been Oscar's, but were now twisted into a permanent snarl of rage. In its right hand, it held an axe. The blade was old and stained, but the edge caught what little light there was and threw it back like a promise. "You came looking for a story," it said in a voice like grinding stone. Every word carried the weight of decades of fury. "Let me tell you about the night they killed me." Sarah couldn't move. Terror had frozen her muscles, turned her blood to ice water. This wasn't supposed to be real. Supernatural creatures were supposed to be stories. Creepypasta shared around digital campfires. Not this. Not standing in front of her with an axe and the patience of something that had been hunting for 75 years. "They dragged me from my home while my wife watched," the Goatman continued, taking a step closer. Its hooves rang against the metal like church bells. "My children were hiding under the bed, crying for their daddy. But I couldn't help them, couldn't protect them, couldn't do anything but die." Another step. The stench was overwhelming now, filling Sarah's nostrils with the smell of decay and animal musk. "Do you know what it's like to hang from a rope? To feel your neck snap but stay conscious? To swing back and forth while they laugh and spit and call you things that would make the devil himself blush?" Sarah found her voice. I didn't. Do you know them? I wasn't there. I am just another curious soul come to gawk at the dead black man. This ghost," the creature snarled. "Another tourist wanting to turn my pain into entertainment. How many views will my suffering get you? How much money will you make from my murder? That's not. I wanted to tell your story. Honor your memory." The Goatman laughed, and the sound was like branches breaking in a windstorm. "Honor? You want to honor me? Then stay. Become part of the story. Let me show you what those men felt in their final moments." It raised the axe, and Sarah's paralysis shattered like glass. She ran. Behind her, hooves thundered against metal as the creature gave chase. Sarah's sneakers slipped on the rusty grating, but fear gave her speed and desperation gave her balance. She could hear the Goatman breathing behind her. Great huffing sounds like a steam engine building pressure. She reached the end of the bridge and kept running, crashing through the underbrush toward where she left her car. Branches tore at her clothes and drew blood from her face, but she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. The thing behind her had been hunting for 3/4 of a century. It knew these woods better than she knew her own apartment. Her Honda sat exactly where she left it, dark and lifeless in the middle of the old road. Sarah yanked on the door handle, but it didn't budge. The locks hadn't engaged. They never did, but the door wouldn't open. She tried again, putting her shoulder into it. Nothing. It was like the metal had fused solid, like the car had become one piece instead of separate parts. The hoof steps stopped somewhere behind her in the darkness. "Where are you going?" the Goatman called out, and its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This is my domain now. These woods, this bridge, this whole stretch of forgotten road. I've had 75 years to learn every hiding place, every escape route. There's nowhere to run that I haven't already walked." Sarah pulled out her phone and tried calling 911. The screen showed no bars, but she dialed anyway. Nothing, not even a dial tone. The device was working. She could see the time, 11:56 p.m. But it couldn't connect to anything beyond this pocket of supernatural horror. Technology, the creature laughed. Amazing how it fails when old powers are at work. The same darkness that swallowed my body that night still lives here. Still hungers. A twig snapped to her left. Sarah spun toward the sound, but saw only tree trunks and shadows. When she turned back, the Goatman was standing 10 feet away. Up close, the wrongness of it was even more apparent. The human torso didn't quite connect properly to the goat legs. The fur grew in patches, revealing pale skin underneath that looked waxy and unnatural. And the smell, God, the smell was like stepping inside a slaughterhouse during a heat wave. "You wanted to know about American horror," it said, hefting the axe. "Let me teach you. Let me show you what real fear tastes like." Sarah, as survival instincts kicked in, she couldn't outrun it, couldn't escape in her car, couldn't call for help. But she could still think, could still use the one advantage she had, her knowledge. "Wait," she said, holding up her hands. "You wrong about me. I didn't come here to mock you or make money off your death. I came here because I believe in justice." The Goatman paused, its head tilted like a dog hearing a strange sound. Sarah pressed on. "I know the names of the men who killed you. Robert Patterson, James McGriff, William Stark, Thomas Elkins, Edward Walsh. I know they formed a lynch mob because you were succeeding, because you were making them look bad by comparison. How do you know those names?" The creature's voice was suspicious but no longer entirely hostile. "Research. The same kind of research that let me find out what really happened to them after you died. They didn't just disappear, Oscar. They were tortured, hunted. You made them pay for what they did, and you did it slowly." The Goatman lowered its axe slightly. "You've been investigating my killers? For 3 months. I wanted to get the story right. Not just the ghost story, but the real story. The story of a man who was murdered because he refused to accept that the color of his skin should limit what he could achieve." Sarah was lying through her teeth, making it up as she went along, but she could see it was working. The creature's posture had relaxed, and those burning eyes were fixed on her face instead of scanning for the best place to bury the axe. "What else do you know?" it asked. "I know that Robert Patterson died in 1951, found in pieces along the creek bank, his chest torn open like he'd been mauled by a bear. Except there were no bears in this part of Maryland. He lasted the longest," the Goatman said with satisfaction. "I saved the leader for last, made him watch what happened to the others first. And I know that the local sheriff covered it all up, ruled them animal attacks even though everyone knew better, even though the hoof prints around the bodies were too big and too deep to belong to any natural creature. Sheriff Morton was smart enough to leave me alone, smart enough to know that some debts require supernatural collection." Sarah nodded, still playing for time, still looking for an angle that might save her life. "That's the real American horror story. Not the monster, but the system that created it. The evil that was done in daylight by respectable men who went to church on Sunday and murdered innocent people on Tuesday." The creature considered this for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice had lost some of its grinding harshness. "You speak like someone who understands. But understanding doesn't to change what you are. You're still an outsider come to profit from my pain. No, Sarah said. I am someone who believes your story deserves to be told truthfully. Someone who thinks the world should know what really happened here. Not creepypasta. Not urban legends. The truth. The truth died with me on this bridge 75 years ago. Then let me help you bring it back to life. The Goatman stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in the silence, could feel sweat running down her back despite the cold. Everything depended on the next few seconds. On whether this creature of vengeance could remember what it had been before hatred consumed it. You would do this? It asked finally. Tell my story honestly? Show the world what those men were? Yes, but I need to survive to do it. And you need to let me go. The creature. His laugh was bitter. Let you go? Child, you don't. Do you understand what you re-asking? I haven't let anyone go in 75 years. Can let anyone go. The hunger won to allow it. What hunger? The hunger for justice, for recognition, for someone to acknowledge what was stolen from me. The Goatman, his voice dropped to a whisper. They've been waiting so long for someone to see past the monster and remember the man. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. How many people have come here looking for the Goatman? Dozens, maybe hundreds. Urban explorers, ghost hunters, teenagers on dares. They all want to see the scary creature. None of them want to hear about Oscar Washburn. What happened to them? The creature gestured toward the forest with its axe. We're still here, still listening, still part of the story. As if summoned by its words, shapes began emerging from the trees. Human figures, but wrong somehow. Their clothes were from different decades, bell-bottom jeans from the 70s, shoulder pants from the 80s, baggy pants from the 90s, skinny jeans from the 2000s. Some carried cell phones, others disposable cameras, a few had old film equipment. But their eyes were gone, replaced by hollow sockets that wept darkness down their cheeks. And when they opened their mouths, Sarah could see that their tongues had been cut out. They came looking for a ghost story, the Goatman explained. So I gave them one, made them part of the supernatural legend they wanted so badly to experience. They watch now, they listen, but they can never speak, can never tell anyone what really happened here. The silent crowd pressed closer, their eyeless faces turned toward Sarah with expressions of desperate hunger. They wanted to scream, she realized, wanted to warn her. But they had no voices left to use. This is what happens to storytellers who don't to understand the weight of the story they trying to tell, the creature continued. They become part of the tale instead of its narrator. Sarah's phone buzzed in her hand. Impossible. There was no signal here, no way for anyone to contact her. She looked down at the screen and saw a text message from an unknown number. The bridge remembers everything. Even the things that were forgotten. What the hell? She whispered. The Goatman, his eyes widened. What did you say? Sarah held up the phone, showing the message. Someone just texted me, but is impossible. There's no signal here. The creature snatched the device from her hands and stared at the screen. For the first time since she'd seen it, the Goatman looked afraid. This shouldn't be possible, it muttered. Nothing gets through the barrier. Nothing technological works here. I made sure of that. The phone buzzed again. Another message appeared. Tell her about the others, Oscar. Tell her about the ones you couldn't save. The Goatman, his hands began shaking. The phone clattered to the ground as it stumbled backward, nearly tripping over its own hooves. No, it whispered. You're dead. They've been dead for 75 years. I watched them hang you too. A third message appeared on the cracked screen. Death ISN, to the end of the story. Brother. Just the beginning of a new chapter. The temperature plummeted. Sarah's breath came out in thick clouds as frost began forming on the metal around them. The eyeless crowd retreated into the forest, their silhouettes dissolving into shadow. But something else was emerging from the darkness beyond the bridge. Another figure, taller than the Goatman, thinner, wearing the remnants of what had once been a suit. Its neck hung at an impossible angle, twisted sideways like a broken doll. But its eyes burned with the same supernatural fire that lit the Goatman, his face. Hello, Oscar, it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. It's been too long. The Goatman fell to its knees. Thomas, is that really you? Your brother in death, if not in life. The newcomer stepped into the circle of light cast by Sarah's fallen phone. Though I have to say, they made quite a mess of things. Sarah stared at the two creatures, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "There are 2 of you." "There were 5 of us," Thomas said without looking at her. 5 black men murdered by the same group of cowards. But Oscar here was always the loudest, the angriest. His rage burned so bright it drowned out the rest of our voices. "You were dead," the Goatman insisted. "I saw them hang you. Saw your body in the water. I was dead. We all were. But death doesn't erase injustice, Oscar. It just changes how we fight it." Thomas turned to face Sarah, and she saw that his eyes held a different kind of fire. Where the Goatman is burned with rage, Thomas is glowed with something that might have been hope. "You want to tell our story truthfully?" he asked. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then tell all of it. Not just the monster Oscar became, but the men we were. The lives we lived before they cut them short. The families we loved. The dreams we died protecting." "I will," Sarah managed to whisper. "Tell them about Marcus Williams, the teacher who was killed for refusing to close his school. Tell them about James Roosevelt, the pastor who died for preaching equality. Tell them about David Chen." "Yes, Chen, like your own name. The immigrant who was murdered for the crime of loving a black woman." Each name hit Sarah like a physical blow. These weren't just victims. They were people, real people with real lives that had been snuffed out by hatred and fear. "And tell them about me," Thomas continued. "Thomas Elkins Washington, the lawyer who tried to bring their killers to justice. Who died with a briefcase full of evidence that could have put them all in prison." "I buried that briefcase," the Goatman said, its voice hollow. "Buried it deep so no one would ever find it. But burial isn't destruction. Is it, Oscar? The truth has a way of working itself back to the surface." Thomas gestured toward the bridge, and Sarah saw something she hadn't noticed before. The metal supports weren't just rusted. They were marked, carved with symbols and words that looked like they'd been scratched there by desperate fingers. Names, dates, messages, a historical record written in iron and blood. "The bridge remembers," Thomas said softly. "Even when the people forget, the places remember. Every tear that fell here, every life that ended here, every injustice that was done here. It is all written in the metal and stone." Sarah picked up her phone, surprised to find it still working. "What do you want me to do?" "Document it," Thomas said. "All of it, not just the ghost story, but the human story. Make them understand that we weren't monsters who became men. We were men who were turned into monsters by monstrous acts." The Goatman looked up from its knees. "And what about me? What about the things I've done? The people I've killed?" "Guilt is its own kind of prison," Thomas replied. "But it doesn't have to be a life sentence. Help her tell the truth, Oscar. Help her make sure our deaths meant something." Sarah raised her camera, then hesitated. "Will you let me take your pictures? Will you let me prove you real?" The 2 creatures looked at each other for a long moment. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that transcends words and species and death itself. "One picture," the Goatman said finally. "But you don't. You show the faces. You protect our dignity, even in death." "Especially in death," Thomas added. Sarah nodded and raised the camera. Through the viewfinder, she saw them as they truly were. Not monsters, but victims. Not supernatural creatures of American horror, but men whose humanity had been stolen from them by acts of such profound evil that death itself couldn't contain their need for justice. The flash went off once, preserving the moment forever. When the light faded, Thomas was gone, vanished as suddenly as he appeared, leaving only the lingering smell of old paper and the memory of hope in his eyes. The Goatman stood slowly, its massive frame unfolding in the darkness. "He's right, about making the deaths mean something. I've spent 75 years focused on revenge when I should have been focused on remembrance." "What will happen to the others?" Sarah asked. "The people they collected?" The creature was quiet for a long moment. I've been what I am for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." "Maybe you don't have to stop being what you are. Maybe you just have to change why you are." The Goatman tilted its head. "Explain. Instead of hunting people who come here out of curiosity, help them understand what they're really looking for. Be the guardian of the story instead of its prison warden." A guardian. The word seemed to taste strange in the creature's mouth. "I like the sound of that." Sarah's car engine suddenly roared to life behind them, headlights blazing like twin suns in the darkness. The Honda sat exactly where she left it, but now the doors hung open in invitation. "You should go," the Goatman said, "before I change my mind about letting you live." Sarah gathered her equipment and backed toward the car, never taking her eyes off the creature. I'll tell their story. All their stories, I promise. See that you do. And remember, this isn't just another creepypasta to share around the internet. This is a piece of American horror that really happened. These were real people who suffered real injustices. Sarah nodded and climbed into her car. The engine purred like it had never broken down, the radio crackled to life with late-night jazz, and the GPS showed a clear route back to civilization. As she drove away, she looked in her rearview mirror and saw the Goatman standing in the middle of the bridge, watching her go. In the red glow of her taillights, it looked less like a monster and more like what it really was. A sentry, standing guard over a story that needed telling. Sarah drove through the night with her windows down, letting the cold air clear the smell of death and decay from her nostrils. She had work to do, research to conduct, a briefcase to find, and a truth to tell. Her phone buzzed with one final message from the unknown number. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. The dead have been silent for too long." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Not anymore." The response came immediately. "Welcome to the real American horror story. The one where the monsters are human and the humans become monsters. But also the one where sometimes, if you're very lucky and very careful, the dead can be brought back to life through the simple act of being witnessed." Behind her, the Goatman's bridge disappeared into the darkness. But the story it carried would soon see daylight again, told by someone who understood that the most terrifying supernatural tales are the ones that start with very human evil. And in the woods around Kettle Creek, 5 men who had been silent for 75 years finally began to rest. The bridge remembers everything, even the things that were supposed to be forgotten forever. But some stories are too important to forget. Some ghosts are too necessary to let fade away. And sometimes, the only way to lay the dead to rest is to make sure the living remember why they died. Sarah Chen had come looking for a ghost story. Instead, she found something far more valuable. She found the truth. Story 5. Hanging Tree of Jericho. The rope was still there. Maya pulled her documentary crew's van to a stop in what used to be Jericho's town square, her headlights cutting through the October fog like knives. The massive oak tree dominated the center of the abandoned space, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like arthritic fingers. And hanging from the lowest branch, swaying gently in the windless night, was a length of old hemp rope. "Fresh rope. This to be right," she whispered, checking her GPS again. But the coordinates matched perfectly. Jericho, Pennsylvania, population 0 since 1978. The ghost town that even ghost hunters avoided. Maya had been researching American horror stories for her YouTube channel for 3 years, but this case was different. Personal. Her grandmother had lived in Jericho until she was 12, fleeing with her family in 1977 after something happened that she would never talk about. Something involving the hanging tree and the shadows that danced beneath it. Now, 46 years later, Maya was back to uncover the truth. She grabbed her camera equipment and stepped out of the van. The silence hit her like a physical force. No insects, no wind. Even her footsteps seemed muffled, as if the very air was absorbing sound. The town square stretched out before her in the pale moonlight. Empty storefronts lined the perimeter, their windows dark and broken. A few buildings had collapsed entirely, leaving piles of rotted wood and rusted metal. But everything was arranged in a perfect circle around the oak tree, like the entire town had been built as an offering to whatever lived in its shadow. Maya raised her camera and started filming. The night vision setting revealed details invisible to the naked eye. Scratches in the tree bark that looked almost like letters. Dark stains on the rope that could have been anything but felt like blood. And faces. Human faces pressed against the windows of the abandoned buildings, watching her with eyes that reflected the camera, this infrared light like mirrors. Maya lowered the camera and looked at the nearest storefront with her bare eyes. Empty, just broken glass and darkness. She raised the camera again. The faces were still there. "Okay," she said to herself, forcing her voice to stay steady. "This is definitely going in the supernatural category." According to her research, the hanging tree had been Jericho's unofficial courthouse for over 50 years. From 1820 to 1871, anyone accused of a serious crime was brought to the oak for judgment. The town council would deliberate while the accused waited with a noose around their neck. Guilty verdict meant a short drop and a quick death. Not guilty meant freedom. But the records Maya had found suggested that not guilty verdicts were rare in Jericho. Very rare. 17 people had been executed at the tree. Horse thieves, murderers, a woman accused of witchcraft, and several men whose only crime seemed to be having the wrong skin color in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves somewhere in the surrounding forest, forgotten by everyone except the tree that had watched them die. Maya walked closer to the massive oak, her footsteps echoing strangely in the empty square. The tree was ancient, its trunk easily 20 feet around, its canopy so dense that no moonlight penetrated to the ground beneath it. The bark was scarred with decades of initials and dates and messages carved by people who were now long dead. But there were fresh carvings too. Help US, scratched in shaky letters near the base. Below that, they want to let US leave, in a different hand. And higher up, barely visible in the camera, this light, the rope remembers. Maya's skin crawled. These markings looked recent, days old, maybe weeks. But who could have made them? Jericho had been abandoned for over 40 years. The state had even removed it from most maps after a series of accidents claimed the lives of urban explorers in the 1980s. A branch creaked overhead. Maya looked up and saw the rope swaying, even though there was no wind. It moved in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, like someone invisible was testing its strength, or like something was hanging from it that she couldn't see. Her camera's battery died. The digital display went black, and the night vision cut out, plunging Maya into near-total darkness. She fumbled for her backup equipment, but her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the bag. Lenses and memory cards scattered across the ground with sounds like breaking bones. Come on, she muttered, searching for her flashlight. Her fingers found the metal cylinder and clicked it on. The beam revealed a circle of figures standing around the tree. Maya, a scream caught in her throat. The figures were translucent, shimmering like heat mirages, but she could see their faces clearly. Men and women in period clothing from different eras. Their necks were all wrong, twisted at impossible angles, and their tongues hung from their mouths like purple ribbons. The hanged, all 17 victims of Jericho, its tree, standing in silent vigil around their place of execution. But they weren't looking at Maya. They were looking past her, toward the abandoned buildings that ringed the square. And their expressions weren't angry or vengeful. They were afraid. Maya spun around, following their gaze, and saw lights in the windows of the dead town. Warm, yellow lights like oil lamps or candles. They flickered and moved, and behind them, she could make out shapes. Human shapes moving through rooms that should have been empty for decades. What the hell? She whispered. The lights began to converge on the town square. Not floating or drifting like ghosts, but walking. Purposeful, intent. Maya grabbed her equipment and ran toward her van, but the engine wouldn't start. The key turned, the dashboard lit up, but when she pressed the gas pedal, nothing happened. She tried again, panic rising in her throat like bile. Nothing. Behind her, footsteps echoed across the square, heavy boots on broken pavement, and voices, low and serious, discussing something in words she couldn't quite make out. Maya crouched behind the van and peered around the bumper. A group of people emerged from the abandoned buildings, carrying lanterns and moving with the confident stride of those who knew exactly where they were going. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, long coats and wide-brimmed hats, like something from a Western movie. But their faces were wrong, pale and gaunt, with eyes that reflected the lantern light like an animal. And when they opened their mouths to speak, Maya could see that their teeth were too sharp, too numerous, filing their jaws in rows like a shark. Bring the accused to the tree, one of them said in a voice like grinding stone. The council will hear the charges. The others murmured agreement and began walking toward Maya's hiding spot. She pressed herself against the van's side, trying to become invisible, but she knew it was useless. They had seen her, had probably been watching her since she arrived. Maya Chen. Another voice called out. Granddaughter of Elizabeth Chen, who fled this town in shame. You have returned to face judgment for your family's crimes. What crimes? Maya shouted, surprising herself with her own boldness. My grandmother was 12 years old when she left here. The figures stopped walking. In the sudden silence, Maya could hear the rope creaking overhead and the soft whisper of wind through dead leaves. The crime of witnessing, the first voice replied. The crime of surviving, the crime of remembering what should have been forgotten. Maya's mind raced. Her grandmother had always refused to talk about Jericho, changing the subject whenever Maya asked about her childhood. But sometimes, late at night when she thought no one was listening, Maya had heard her grandmother crying and whispering the same words over and over. They made us watch. They made the children watch. You were the town council, Maya realized aloud. You were the ones who sentenced people to hang. We are the guardians of justice, another voice corrected. We ensure that the guilty are punished and the innocent are protected. But everyone you hanged was innocent. The laughter that rose from the assembled figures was like the sound of ravens fighting over carrion. Cold and sharp and utterly without humor. Innocent, the leader said. Child, there is no such thing as innocence. Only degrees of guilt, only levels of sin that must be balanced against the greater good of the community. The figures began moving again, their lanterns casting dancing shadows across the square. Maya could see them more clearly now, and what she saw made her stomach turn. Their faces were human, but wrong. Features that almost fit together but didn't quite match. Eyes that were slightly too large, mouths that stretched too wide, noses that bent at angles that defied anatomy. These weren't the ghosts. They were something else, something that had been human once but had become something darker through decades of judging and condemning and killing. The tree called to you, one of them said, moving closer. Called to you through blood and memory. Your grandmother. This blood carries the stain of her cowardice, and that stain passes down through generations. My grandmother wasn't a coward, Maya snapped. She was smart enough to get her family out of a town full of murderers. The figure closest to her raised its lantern, and Maya saw that its face was partially melted, as if it had been burned with acid. When it smiled, the expression pulled its features into even more grotesque configurations. Your grandmother witnessed a hanging, it said. The execution of Thomas Garrett, accused of the rape and murder of a young woman. But she spoke against the judgment, claimed the man was innocent, claimed she had seen the real killer. Maya's blood ran cold. Who was the real killer? Does it matter? The judgment had been passed. The sentence was to be carried out. But your grandmother's testimony created doubt in the minds of some townspeople. Doubt that threatened the order we had worked so hard to maintain. The creature, his eyes fixed on Maya's face with predatory intensity. So we decided to make an example of her, a public demonstration of what happens to those who question the council, this wisdom. We prepared a small noose, just her size, and gathered the entire town to watch. Maya felt sick. She was 12 years old. Age is irrelevant to justice, but her family interfered, spirited her away in the night before the sentence could be carried out. Fled like thieves and cowards, abandoning their community in its moment of need. You were going to hang a child for telling the truth. The creature shrugged. Truth is what the council decides it is. Reality is what serves the greater good. Your grandmother's version of truth would have undermined everything we had built. Another figure stepped forward, this one wearing the remains of what had once been a judge. Its robes. Its face was completely smooth, like a mannequin, with only shallow indentations where features should have been. But the debt remains unpaid, it said in a voice like wind through an empty house. The sentence was never carried out. The balance was never restored. So the tree called to you, child, called you home to face the justice your grandmother escaped. Maya looked around desperately for escape routes, but the creatures had formed a circle around her. Beyond them, she could see the ghostly figures of the hanged still standing vigil beneath the oak, their faces filled with what might have been sympathy. What happened to Thomas Garrett? Maya asked, stalling for time while she tried to think of a plan. Hanged, of course, the judge creature replied, as was proper, and the real killer continued to serve the community faithfully for many years, until natural death claimed him, as it claims all mortals. So you knew he was innocent. You knew, and you killed him anyway. The creatures exchanged glances that might have been amusement. Innocence and guilt are human concepts, one of them said. We serve a higher purpose. We maintain order. We ensure that the community survives, even if individuals must be sacrificed. Maya's camera bag lay on the ground nearby, its contents scattered. Among the equipment was a small digital voice recorder she used for interviews. If she could reach it, maybe she could document what was happening. Create some record of the truth. Even if she didn't, she survived to share it. What higher purpose? She asked, taking a small step toward the bag. You were not protecting anyone. The town died. Everyone left. The town serves its true function now, the leader said. It draws the curious, the foolish, the ones who dig too deep into matters that should remain buried. And we ensure they never leave to spread their stories, like the family in the 1970s. The last residents, the creatures' expressions grew hungrier. The Kowalskis, yes, they served admirably. Father, mother, 2 young children. Their bones fertilize the oak, its roots now, helping it grow strong. Maya, his stepbrother within arm, is reach of the voice recorder. And all the urban explorers who disappeared over the years, fed to the tree, as is proper, as you will be fed to the tree, once judgment has been passed. Maya lunged for the recorder, but the nearest creature moved faster than anything human should be able to move. Its hand clamped around her wrist with fingers that felt like iron bars, and its touch was cold enough to burn. The accused will approach the tree, it commanded. The other creatures began chanting in a language Maya didn't to recognize, words that seemed to crawl into her ears and burrow into her brain like parasites. The sound made her teeth ache and her vision blur. They dragged her toward the massive oak, past the circle of ghostly witnesses who watched with expressions of helpless sorrow. The rope hung down like an invitation, swaying in a wind that Maya couldn't feel. Wait, she gasped, fighting against the iron grip on her arms. You're making a mistake. I'm not here to cause trouble. I am here to tell stories. What manner of stories? The judge creature asked, pausing at the base of the tree. Maya's mind raced. American horror stories, creepypasta for the internet, ghost stories that entertain people but don't threaten anyone. Explain. I run a YouTube channel. I research supernatural legends and present them as entertainment. Fiction. People watch them to get scared, but they don't believe they real. They think they were just stories. The creatures conferred among themselves in their alien language, their voices like insects clicking in the darkness. Finally, the leader turned back to Maya. You would present our work as mere fiction? Reduce our sacred duty to entertainment for the masses? Yes, Maya said eagerly. That's exactly what I do. I tell people about the hanging tree in the ghost town, but frame it as a scary story. A creepypasta. They'd be thrilled by the horror, but they wouldn't take it seriously enough to come looking for the truth. And what of your grandmother? As testimony. What of the truth you claim to be seeking? Maya, his heart hammered against her ribs. This was her only chance. What if the truth ISN? What you think it is? What if my grandmother didn't flee because she was afraid of you? The creatures went very still. Even their constant chittering fell silent. What if she fled because she knew something you didn't want her to know? Something about who really killed that woman. Impossible, the leader snarled. We conducted a thorough investigation. Thomas Garrett was clearly guilty. Then why did you need to silence a 12-year-old girl? If the case was so clear, why were you afraid of her testimony? Maya could see doubt flickering in their inhuman eyes. After decades of absolute certainty, she had introduced a crack in their conviction. My grandmother kept a diary. She lied desperately. She wrote down everything she saw that night. Everything she remembered, including the name of the man she saw leaving the scene of the crime. What name? The judge creature demanded. Maya took a wild guess based on what they had told her. Councilmember Harrison Blackwood, the man who pushed hardest for Thomas Garrett's execution. The silence that followed was profound enough to make Maya's ears ring. The creatures stared at her with expressions that might have been shock, or rage, or something beyond human emotion entirely. Harrison Blackwood died of natural causes in 1899, one of them said finally. He was a pillar of the community, a man of unimpeachable character, a man who raped and murdered a young woman, then convinced the council to execute an innocent man to cover his tracks, Maya countered. A man who would have murdered a child to protect his secret. You lie, the leader hissed, but its voice carried less conviction than before. Do I? Then why are you so afraid of what my grandmother might have written? Why kill me before you've even seen her diary? Maya could see the conflict playing out on their grotesque faces, doubt warring with decades of certainty, the possibility that their sacred mission had been built on a foundation of lies. Where is this diary? The judge creature asked. Hidden, Maya said. Somewhere safe. If I don't return from this trip, my research partner will publish everything online. Every detail of what really happened in Jericho. Every name of every council member who participated in the cover-up. The creatures began arguing among themselves, their alien language rising and falling like a tide of confusion and anger. Maya used the distraction to inch closer to her scattered equipment, hoping to find something she could use as a weapon or a means of escape. Her fingers closed around a small LED flashlight, one of the high-powered ones designed for outdoor photography. She palmed it and waited for her chance. "Even if your claims were true," the leader said, turning back to her, "it changes nothing. The tree requires payment. The balance must be maintained. You will hang, as your grandmother should have hanged. But I'll never know for sure," Maya said. "You'll execute me based on incomplete information, just like you executed Thomas Garrett. And when my research partner publishes the diary, the whole world will know that the Great Council of Jericho spent 150 years protecting a murderer and killing innocents." The creatures fell silent again. Maya could practically hear the gears grinding in their alien minds as they tried to process the possibility that their entire existence had been based on a lie. "Show us the diary," the judge creature said finally. "It's not here. It's back home, in a safe deposit box. Then you will return home and retrieve it. You will bring it back to us, and we will determine the truth of your claims." Maya's heart leapt. They were going to let her leave, but as quickly as hope rose in her chest, it was crushed by the realization that she was lying. There was no diary, no research partner, no safe deposit box. If she left and came back empty-handed, they would know she had deceived them. And their punishment would be far worse than a simple hanging. "I need proof," she said, thinking quickly. "If I am going to convince my partner to release the diary, I need evidence that you real. Something I can show them." The creatures conferred again, their voices like the sound of breaking glass. Finally, they reached some kind of consensus. "You may document our existence," the leader said, "but the recording remains here until you return with the diary. Insurance against your potential betrayal." Maya nodded and moved toward her camera equipment. The battery was still dead, but she had spare power packs in the van. She walked slowly toward the vehicle, expecting to be stopped at any moment, but the creatures seemed content to watch her from a distance. Her hands shook as she connected the new battery to the camera. The device came to life with a soft chime, and she quickly switched to night vision mode. Through the viewfinder, she could see the creatures clearly. Their grotesque faces and impossible anatomies were perfectly captured in the green-tinted display. But something was wrong. In addition to the council members, she could see other figures. Dozens of them, hundreds, maybe. They filled the square like a crowd at a festival, all of them transparent and shimmering like the hanged victims beneath the tree. These weren't the executed. These were the executioners. Every person who had ever participated in Jericho, this twisted version of justice, bound to the town by their crimes and unable to move on to whatever came next. "My God," Maya whispered. "We're all trapped here." The leader creature heard her and glided closer. "We are bound by duty, bound by purpose. We cannot rest until perfect justice has been achieved. But perfect justice is impossible. There will always be doubt, always be questions. You created your own hell." The creature's expression shifted, and for a moment Maya saw something almost human in its features. A flicker of despair, quickly suppressed. "Record your message," it commanded. "Then return with the diary." Maya raised the camera and began filming. But instead of documenting the creatures for some fictional research partner, she began telling the real story. The story of a town so obsessed with order and justice that it created monsters. The story of innocent people murdered to maintain social control. The story of a 12-year-old girl who saw the truth and had to flee for her life. "This is Maya Chen reporting from Jericho, Pennsylvania," she said to the camera. "What you're about to see is real American horror. Not supernatural entertainment, but human evil so profound it literally created ghosts." The creatures realized what she was doing and began moving toward her with inhuman speed. But Maya kept recording, kept talking, kept documenting the truth that had been buried for over a century. "The hanging tree behind me has claimed 17 innocent lives, and the monsters who killed them are still here, still judging, still executing anyone who threatens their version of reality." The leader creature reached her just as she pressed the upload button on her camera's wireless connection. The video began streaming directly to her cloud storage account, beyond the reach of Jericho's supernatural barriers. "The truth is out there now," she told the creature as its iron fingers closed around her throat. "The whole world will know what you are." The creature, his face contorted with rage and despair. "Then we are all lost." "No," Maya gasped. "Now you can finally rest." The creature, his grip loosened. Around the square, the other council members had stopped moving, Their faces turned toward the sky as if seeing something Maya couldn't perceive. "The binding is broken," the judge creature said in wonder. "After all these years, the truth has set us free." One by one, the ghostly figures began to fade, not disappearing, but dissolving into points of light that drifted upward like sparks from a fire. The council members, the hanged victims, even the hidden spirits of everyone who had died in Jericho over the years. All of them finally free to move on. Maya stood alone in the empty square, watching the last of the lights fade into the star-filled sky. Her camera was still recording, capturing the moment when truth triumphed over the lies that had sustained a town's worth of monsters for a century and a half. She walked back to her van, unsurprised to find that the engine started immediately. As she drove away from Jericho for what she knew would be the last time, she could see the hanging tree in her rearview mirror. It was just a tree now, old and gnarled and scarred by time, but no longer supernatural. No longer dangerous, just a monument to the human capacity for both great evil and eventual redemption. Maya's phone buzzed with notifications as her video began accumulating views and comments. People around the world were watching her documentation of real American horror, learning the truth about what had happened in a small Pennsylvania town over a century ago. Some would dismiss it as elaborate fiction. Others would recognize it for what it was, proof that the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves through fear, hatred, and the absolute certainty that we alone know what justice looks like. But a few would understand the deeper truth, that horror stories exist not just to scare us, but to remind us of what we're capable of becoming if we're not careful. If we dawn to question authority. If we dawn to speak up for the innocent. If we dawn to remember that doubt is not weakness, but the foundation of wisdom. Maya drove through the night toward home, carrying with her the ghost of her grandmother, his courage and the weight of a story that demanded to be told. Behind her, Jericho settled into the peaceful silence of true abandonment. The hanging tree stood empty in the moonlight, its branches finally still. But in houses across America, people were watching Maya's video and learning about the town that killed innocents in the name of order. Learning about the monsters that ordinary people can become when they stop questioning their own certainty. And maybe, just maybe, deciding to be a little more careful about the judgments they passed and the sentences they supported. Because the rope remembers everything, and some trees never forget the weight they were forced to bear. The story of Jericho was over, but the lessons it taught would live forever in the hearts of those brave enough to listen. And in the digital realm of the internet, where truth and fiction dance together in an eternal ballet of human storytelling, Maya's documentation of real American horror would inspire a new generation of truth-tellers. People who understood that the most important creepypasta stories aren't the ones designed to entertain. The ones designed to warn. The van disappeared into the Pennsylvania night, carrying Maya home to safety and leaving behind only empty buildings and an old oak tree that finally, after more than a century of supernatural servitude, was just a tree again. But trees have long memories, and somewhere in its ancient rings, the hanging tree of Jericho still remembers every story it witnessed, every life it took, every truth it helped bury, waiting patiently for the next person brave enough to listen to what it has to say about the price of justice and the cost of certainty in a world where both can be more terrifying than any ghost.